All righty. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. It is great to be with you here today. My name is Brent Adamson. I'm delighted to be with you. As Kurt mentioned, I work with an organization called CEB, formerly known as the Corporate Executive Board, recently rebranded. So if you ask me today what CEB stands for, I can now tell you it stands for CEB. Let me give you a sense for what we're going to do. The one thing that's a little hard is I've been asked to actually shave some time off of my presentation, which is hard because it takes me 20 minutes to say hello, as you can tell right now. So with that in mind, let me give you a sense for what we're going to do, and then we're going to dive right in. Now, for those of you who don't know us at CEB, I sit in the sales and marketing practice at CEB, and what that means simply is that we work with heads of sales and marketing all over the world to try to understand as deeply as we possibly can what does world-class selling and marketing look like in the B2B space. We do that through data, so through surveys, through analysis, through interviews, qualitative, quantitative research to try and understand what does world-class look like. Now, what I would tell you is for the next 40 minutes, I'm not going to walk you through a bunch of data because I think you'd all fall asleep or walk out. So rather, what I want to do for the next 40 minutes is share with you a story. Now, normally, it might be the story of the challenger sale and the challenger rep and who wins, but many of you know that story already. But what I'd like to do today for the next 40 minutes is not talk about who wins and why, but why it matters so much. And a lot of this is different from what we put in the book. The book came out about, 2 years ago, based on research we did 3 or 4 years ago. What we found is the story is evolving, and it's evolving dramatically, because by far the bigger story today in sales, it is not how we are selling differently. By far the bigger story in sales today is how our customer is buying differently. And those differences matter. Not only they matter a lot. And frankly, they're kind of scary. So let me show you what I mean. Let me just kind of take us back in time just a little bit. Let's take us back in time. It may just be 5 years ago. In fact, it might be this week for some of us. But if you think across the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, virtually all of us around the world in sales and marketing have been on the exact same journey. We know this because we talk to you all over the world. And that is a journey of customer centricity. It is a journey of putting the customer first, a world where the customer is always right. We're building a customer 360 organization. If we could find a better way than the competition to serve our customer and their needs, that is how we're going to win. So we all build the customer-centric strategy. We go out and we try to understand our customers and their needs deeper than anyone else out there. We run surveys. We train our reps on discovery. We want to go out and figure out what's keeping our customers up at night. And we build world-class relationships so we have the right to go in and have those conversations and ask those questions. And that is how we're going to deliver more customer value than anyone else in the world. It all makes sense. This is it. I was at a big pharmaceutical company that you guys would all know just 3 weeks ago up in Toronto, and that was their slogan for the year was Customer 360. Put the customer at the center of everything that we do. Why would you not do this? Of course you would do this. And then something happened. What happened is this. In research that we've been conducting over the last about 2 years now, we've gone out, we've run surveys with the individual customer stakeholders inside our member company's organization. So many of you in this room, in fact, are members of our company, members of the Sales Leadership Council, the Marketing Leadership Council. And so we went out, and companies like you gave us access to your customers, individual stakeholders inside customer organizations. We went out, we ran surveys with them, trying to understand all sorts of different aspects of how they go through a B2B purchase, where they go for information, who they talk to, how long it takes, a whole bunch of stuff. But one of the questions that we asked in the survey was, frankly, at the beginning, kind of innocuous. We just put it in there because we thought it might be kind of interesting. And what we found was really scary. Because here was the question. We simply asked all these individuals, if you think about a typical B2B purchase that you're involved in on a continuum from the due diligence begins over there on the left, the actual purchase decision on the right, we asked them simply, at what point during that typical purchase decision do you pick up the phone, do you fire up an email, and do you reach out to a supplier to get their input on whatever it is that you're doing? And the answer came back at 57%. What's interesting, by the way, about this data, if you are a data person, the data did not range from 27 to 87%. It was a tight distribution, running about 45 to 65%. So right around 57, 60% was the answer for just about everybody. It's especially interesting about this data, the more complex the deal, the later your customers call you. And stop and think about it for a minute. Stop and think about what that blue arrow means for all of us. Because what it means really more than anything else is what are your customers doing inside that blue arrow? They're likely doing the very thing that we hoped we would be doing with them in person, now on their own. They're identifying a need. They're prioritizing that need versus other needs. They're figuring out what capabilities would I need to address that need? Who are the providers who could deliver on that capability? How much do they cost? Let's find that out. So by the time that we're called in at the tip of that blue arrow, there's very little left to discuss, but how big of a discount we're willing to offer that customer to win their business. This is a freight train to RFP station. And we're on it. This stuff is scary. It really is. And if you stop and look and think, I hear you, Brent, I don't know, it's not that bad, is it? What's interesting about this blue arrow is every single one of us does this every single day as a consumer. Think about how this plays out in the B2C world, and we all do this. Why wouldn't you do this? Let me give you an example. Let's think about how you buy a car today. When was the last time anyone walked into a car dealership and sat down and simply said, tell me about the cars you have on offer this year? Who would do that? Right? You don't do that because you don't have to. What do you do instead? You fire up the internet, you talk to your friends, you talk to your colleagues, maybe you go to a website, you do all your research, and today when you walk into that dealership and you sit down with that sales rep, you tell them what car you want, what model you want, what engine you want, what options you want, what color you want, and you tell them the price you want to pay. And you say, by the way, I'm going to need that on Tuesday next week. And you get a little annoyed when they try to talk you out of it, don't you? I was presented to a bunch of heads of sales a couple months ago. One head of sales, a true story, one head of sales said, he said, Brent, it's funny you should say that because I actually did that just last week and I had my cell phone with me. I had that dealer's competitor on my phone sitting at his desk, and when he wouldn't close the deal with me, I closed it with his competitor right there at his desk. And I said, dude, that is cold. But you do it because you can. And you think about that sales rep in that car dealership, he's no longer the sales department, he's the fulfillment department. And it really begs an interesting question, just how far behind are we in B2B? Is this the world? Is this a film coming to a theater near you? And we believe in many ways it might be. Because just to give you an example, we talked to a head of sales in the chemical industry about a year ago, and he said, we were looking at this blue arrow, and he said, Brent, let me tell you what this looks like in our business. He said 5 years ago, 15% of our business went out to RFP. Today, 75% of our business goes out to RFP, and we lose on price, or we win. We're competing around nothing but price every single time. How does that happen? How did we get here? Well, the answer is really interesting. The answer is not something that we did. In fact, it's not even something our customers did. It's something the world did. We invented the internet. And I don't think anyone's going to shut down the internet anytime soon. What your customers can do more than they ever could before is they can learn. They can learn on their own. And that's a pretty interesting thing, because before, when they bought a solution, they'd have to come to us because that information simply wasn't available anywhere else. They'd have to sit down with our reps. They'd have to have that conversation. But today, they don't, because they can learn it somewhere else. Why? Because they can. And it begs a really interesting question. In fact, there's two fascinating questions off this blue arrow I'd like for you all to take with you. The first question is this. It's a bit of a rhetorical one, but nonetheless, I think you'll all wind up in the same place we have, which is this. Let me ask you. Stop for a minute. I want you all to think about your top one or two competitors. The big companies, you guys are small for that matter, the companies you compete with every single day. And I want you to ask yourself, where are they on that diagram? Where are they on that diagram? Chances are pretty good they're at the tip of the same blue arrow. Because your customers aren't doing this to your sales reps, they're doing this to all sales reps. Why? Because they can. And we know this every single day. And it's funny, I'm on the road almost every single day of the week, it seems. But when there are a few days I'm in the office, I'm on the phone all day long, and I'm on the phone with companies. And it's really interesting because you pick up the phone at 9 o'clock in the morning, you're talking to head of sales. He said, Brent, we're at the tip of that blue arrow you keep talking about. We're getting shut out. Our customers calling us late. We're competing on nothing but price. Brent, this is painful. What do we do? And so we talk about it. We talk about how to crack open that blue arrow. We talk about how to get in early. And I'll tell you, we have a great conversation. 2 hours later, I'm on the phone to their direct competitor, and they're saying, Brent, we're at the tip of that blue arrow. We're getting shut out. We're competing on nothing but price, because it's happening not just to you or you or you. It's happening to all of us. And that really takes us to this really mind-bending place. You ready for the mind-bending moment of the morning? Here it is. Because what this blue arrow tells us is this. In many ways, if I were to ask you who are your biggest competitors, you would all list the competition. And you'd be right. But in many ways, in the world of the blue arrow, your biggest competitor today is not the competition and their ability to sell. It's your own customer and their ability to learn on their own. Now think about what happens when you build the customer-centric organization in the world of the blue arrow, where the customer comes first and the customer's always right. In this world, if the customer's always right, we're in big trouble. This stuff is scary. Not just because I'm talking loud, it really is scary. And I'll tell you, I've run meetings all over the world with heads of sales, and I'll sit down, we'll run this as a thought experiment. I'll say, let me do this, thought experiment. Let's just play this out over the next 5 years. Let's assume for a moment just a status quo strategy. Let's just keep selling the way we're selling right now. How does this play out? How does this play out over the next 5 years? What happens? I've had heads of sales literally tell me, Brent, if we don't fix this, we're out of business in 5 years. Think about what it's done to the consumer landscape. Think about the companies that no longer exist today that we thought were world-class just a few short years ago. This stuff is real, and it's scary. And you stop and ask yourself, so what's really happening in this blue arrow? What are your customers doing in this blue arrow? You know what they're doing? They're learning. And that begs the first really important question today that I want you all to write down. Hopefully you all got something to write with. I want you to all write down a question for me if you would. And I want you to take this question home, and I want you to ask your colleagues. I want you to ask your peers. I want you to ask your reps. I want you to ask your customers, because you have to have an answer to this following question, which is if what's happening inside the blue arrows, your customers are learning, here's the question you must know an answer to. Where do our customers learn? Where's that actually happening? Not hypothetically, not strategically, tactically, practically, literally, where is it happening right now? Where do our customers learn? Do we know? Is it on the web? Is it in Is it at conferences? Is it through online communities? Is it through third-party consultants? The answer is probably all of the above, but where, when, how, who's doing it? Do you know? Because if you don't, you're in trouble. If we don't know where our customers learn, you can't get to the second question, which is, are you present where your customers learn? Because let me show you what happens if you're not. Let me show you, what I want to do for the next, 5 minutes or so. I want to crack open that blue arrow, not from our perspective in sales, but from your customer's perspective. And I want to take you on the learning journey that they are all out there going on right now, because it lands you in this incredibly frustrating place that is so deeply painful, yet we feel it every single day. Let me take you on the learning journey. So if you're a customer and you're out there learning, let's say you got to buy something. Maybe it's something you've never bought before. I always like to think of big gas turbines. I don't know why, but let's say you're going to buy a machine. Now, you're going to buy a big machine. It's a couple $1 million, right? This is a big purchase, and you're on the hook to make a good decision on behalf of your company. What are the 3 things you have to know to make this purchase? You have to know, first of all, what's important. You got to figure out how much do I need. You got to figure out what's it going to cost. Now, the beautiful thing is, in the world that we live in today, you can figure all this stuff out. The last thing you want to do is call a sales rep, because what are they going to do? They're going to show up and throw up and talk about how their turbine's better than anyone else's, and you don't care. And by God, if they give you a history of their business, I swear I'm going to kill them. We were founded in 1862 in the back of a pitch. Shut up. I'm sorry, that was unfair. See, I'm a little flippant today. I apologize. But this stuff is so frustrating, isn't it? It really is. So what do you do instead? You learn on your own because you can. So the first thing you got to do is you got to figure out what's important. All right, so what do? You go out and you do your research. You get online, you go to discussion groups, you go to communities, you call in that third-party consultant, you go to trade shows, you do your homework, and you got to figure out what's important. So let's say you're going to buy a machine for your business, and there's all sorts of things that might be important, but you got to figure out what's important for our company. And in doing all your research, by the way, there's a whole process behind this. It's called norming. Some of you guys know the work from Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize winner, behavioral economics, wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow. Among other places, he talks a lot about this whole process of norming. You go out and learn what others like you. People have made this purchase before you. People that look like you. What have they thought? What have they done? This is not unlike how all of us buy on Amazon today. For Christmas, my daughter insisted that I buy her a telescope. I've never bought a telescope before. So I went on Amazon and I learned what everyone else has bought a telescope cared about, and I bought what they told me was important. This is what we do now. Why? Because we can. So you figure out what's important. And maybe in doing all your research on this particular machine, you figure out it's 3 things that matter more than anything else. What's really important is speed, its durability, and its uptime. But now I got to figure out how much speed, how much durability. So I keep digging. I look at our customers, I look at our company's needs. I talk to my colleagues. I go out and do research. I talk to other people, and I figure out, you know what it is? I got to figure out how much do I need? What's the minimum threshold of performance that whatever I buy has to get over? It's got to do at least these things, right? And so maybe in all that research, I figure out I need a machine that does 10 units a day. It lasts 5 years and has 95% uptime. If I've got a machine that lasts 10 years and lasts 5 years, does 10 units a day and has 95% uptime, that's the machine I need. Now, mind you, more might be better. Heck, I'd take more. But that's what I need. It's got to do at least that. So now what do I do? Well, now I got to go out and figure out who sells a machine, who makes a machine that does 10 units a day for 5 years and has at least 95% uptime. I got to figure out who can give me at least that. So I go out and I shop it around. And I find out that company does it, that company doesn't do it, that company does, but yeah, no, they're pretty good. No, that one does, but no, those 3 don't. And I narrow it down. I can narrow it down to the 3 companies that can all meet my minimum threshold of requirements. Every one of those companies has got a great machine, and every one of those machines can do 10 units a day for 5 years and 95% uptime. So what do I need to know now? I need to know what's it going to cost. What's the cheapest I can pay for a machine that does 10 units a day and 95% uptime for 5 years? And this lands us in a really tricky place as a supplier. Because let me tell you what happens when you build a customer-centric organization in this world. You've just built a customer-centric organization. You've gone out and you've done your research. You've run surveys with your customers. You've figured out what they need. You've got sales reps better trained than anyone else in the world to do discovery. And you figured this all out too. You've figured out exactly what your customers need. Why? Because you care about your customers and you are a customer-centric organization. And you've got this nailed. And you know, just like they know, that that's what they're looking for. And you know what? Great news. You know why? Because not only can you meet their needs, you can exceed their needs, because your machine does 12 units a day. Your machine lasts 6 years, and your machine has 98% uptime. This is a slam dunk. Show me the money. So what do? You train your reps to go out and talk about all the differences. Here's what they want. So not only tell them how we can meet their needs, tell them how we can exceed your needs, and your sales reps go out with a glossy brochure. And mind you, it is glossy. And they walk through all the ways that your machine is not only as good as what your customers want, but even better. You want 10, I'll give you 12. You want 5, I'll give you 6. We are the world-class provider of this machine. We've been doing it longer than anyone else. We've got a better track record, and our customers love us. And you know what your customer is going to say? They're going to look you in the eye, and they're going to say, we know. We know. We think you guys are great too. We love your machine. We want your machine. We want 6 years. We want it all. We want that. In fact, that is why you're one of the 3 companies that we've invited to participate in this RFP. That's where you just start streaming out expletives, right? It's so frustrating. But that's how it happens. Welcome to the world of what we've come to call the one of 3 problem. The first time we heard about the one of 3 problem, I was in a meeting at the world headquarters of Philips in Amsterdam, and I was running a sales meeting there with about a bunch of heads of sales. And there was a head of sales there from an industrial fragrances company based in Germany. His name's Wolfgang, because, well, he's German. But in any case, here's what Wolfgang had to say. And it's a very well-respected company. He said, Brent, I hear about all this Challenger stuff, but here's what's so frustrating to me. He says, we are the #1 provider of industrial fragrances, not in Germany, but in the world. Everyone knows it. Everyone agrees with it. They love our company. They love our products. They love our brand. We are invited to every single RFP you could possibly imagine. We have a seat at the table every single time. And every single time, we compete on nothing but price. I've won the game in every dimension, and I'm still getting hosed. How does that happen? He didn't actually say hosed. He's a German. And this is what happens when your customers can learn on your own. This is what happens when you don't just compete against your competitor's ability to sell, but when you compete against your own customer's ability to learn, because it lands you in this deeply painful place. You now live in a world where your customer look at you and say, I know your machine's better. I want your machine. I want 12 units a day. I want 6 years. I want it all. Yes. And you're thinking, cha-ching, here it comes. And then they say this. They say, I want it. I want that. Yes, I want that. But I got to tell you, the other guy's a little bit cheaper. So if I could get your machine at his price, I think we're good to go. Because what we all fail to realize is in the world where your customers learn on their own, in the world of the blue arrow, your customers aren't looking for maximum performance. They're looking for a minimum threshold. We now live in the world where your customers will settle for good enough because they can figure out what good enough is for their business. This is hard. What do you do when your customer will look you right in the eye and stipulate that you're better right up front and still not pay you for it? That's what your reps are out there facing every single day. And it tells us something about the kinds of interactions we have to have with our customers. It tells us we cannot just go out and teach our customers. We cannot just go out and provide them more information. We can't just go out and give them another idea to think. We can't just teach them. We have to unteach them. We have to show them. By the way, if you're wondering, did we make up that word? Yes, we totally made that up. But anyway, nonetheless, it actually works. It works a lot because you have to unteach your customers. You have to show them that in all of their learning and all of their research, despite everything that they've done on their own, somewhere along the line, they missed something. They overlooked something. They made a mistake. And somewhere, we've got to be able to look them in the eye and tell them, actually, they got it wrong. Because if they got it right, we're in big trouble. Because they'll agree you're better, they just won't pay you for it. Now, here's the thing we find. So you got to compete on this whole idea of essentially unteaching your customer. But how do you do it? Well, this is what we've talked about in the past. You do it through world-class insight. Insight that shows your customer that despite all of their learning, somehow they've missed something. Again, it's not just outselling the competition, it's outlearning your customer. But now here's what's so interesting, particularly when you talk to heads of marketing. When we talk about insight, and we have been talking about insight now for, 3-4 years through the Challenger work. What we find from heads of marketing say, yep, Brent, I get it. You're absolutely right. We have to be a world-class insight generator. And you know what, good news, Brent, we do that already. And I'm thinking, oh, God, here it comes, right? Because they're saying, Brent, we are a thought leader in our industry. The number one priority for our organization is thought leadership. And if we agree with you, Brent, if we can be the number one thought leader in the industry, that is how we are going to win in this world. And what we find is when we sit down and look at what they're doing in the name of thought leadership, it doesn't actually overcome this problem. Because at the end of the day, what we find is thought leadership is not the same thing as insight. Insight is actually different. And this, by the way, is one of the biggest challenges we're having right now with the Challenger story is all the false positives. All the companies say, we got that thing nailed. And we're finding actually they're still struggling because they've actually sort of conflated thought leadership and insight. So let me take a minute and talk a little bit about what we see, at least, to be the difference between thought leadership and insight. Because we all do this, right? We all have some sort of content machine. And these days, more than ever before, we're doing marketing automation. We're hiring vendors to create blog posts for us. And we're putting more content out into the world than ever before. And goodness knows, there's more information out there than ever before. And your customers can see it all and learn it all. It's a sea of information. And we're dumping more into it every single day. But how do we cut through that clutter? And that's insight. So let me walk you through this. I'm going to walk through this because I realize some of you in the back might be squinting a little bit. So let me tell you what you see up on this page. We like to call this the egg, for obvious reasons perhaps. And what we're going to work towards is insight in the center of that blue egg there. But to do that, we're going to start up in the top left with number 1, and we're going to work through these different layers of content because there's all sorts of different flavors of content that we might call insight that actually aren't. So start on the outside, on the top left, with general information. Now, what is general information? General information is just that. It's information generally about just about anything. This is the clutter that you got to cut through. Because goodness knows there's a lot of it out there. So if we want to make sure that we're not just dumping more content out in the world that our customers are frankly going to ignore rather than take a look at, if you look on the far left of that egg, if you squint there, it says be credible, be relevant. If we want to pass the first filter of world-class insight, we got to make sure that we're credible. That when we tell a story, it's believable. It's based on data. It's based on something other than just sort of assertion. And it's got to be relevant. If I can tell you an incredibly compelling story that doesn't speak to your needs, and frankly, I'm not going to listen. It's just general information. It's the buzz out there. So be credible and be relevant. The first thing, if you want to create world-class insight, you've got to do is be credible and be relevant. But notice that just takes us through that first filter. Now we're in the second layer of this diagram in box number 2 up in the left, which is accepted information. Now, what is that? Well, accepted information is just that. It is information out there that generally we know to be true, but still sort of adds an interesting statistic, perhaps. And what's interesting is how much of the content that we all produce all over the world in the name of insight that is nothing more than accepted information. Let me give you some examples. 95% of CIOs are concerned about what cloud computing means for their organization. 85% of the global workforce reports being disengaged in their jobs today. We find statistics like this all over the place, all the time, and companies producing mountains and mountains of data and saying, I got the insight thing licked. And what we find is actually that's not insight. It's data. And more than anything else, what do we know about accepted information is it just kind of confirms, it doesn't tell me something I didn't know already, it just confirms something I already did. Sure, I may not have known it was 95% of CIOs are concerned about what cloud computing means for the company, but I knew it was a lot of them. So it doesn't actually lead to me to do anything. I don't really learn anything. I'm certainly not going to do anything differently. So the next filter in our diagram then is the next filter down is you got to be newsworthy. You got to show your customers something they didn't already know. And that leads us to box number 3, which is thought leadership. Now, of all the things on this diagram here, this is the one that I think is most important because this is the one that can truly get us in trouble. Because companies all over the world will not only tell you they are doing thought leadership, they will tell you they aspire to thought leadership. We want to be a thought leader in our industry. We want to be the companies out there putting that great content out there so they all learn from us, and that's how we're going to win. We're doing it, right? We're doing it well. But what is thought leadership? Thought leadership is ideas, research about things that your customer may not have known. And so to be fair, for the first time across this diagram, you actually are teaching. Your customers are learning something new. It is indeed newsworthy. But it's all about what they could be doing. It's all about, I like to say, the castle on the hill. It's all about how the world could be better if you just embraced big data. It's how the world could be better if we could just figure out a way to incorporate new risk management strategies into our industry. It's all how we could all live in a better place if we just rolled out better IT infrastructure. It's all about what we could be doing. But at the end of the day, you look at it and say, you're right, that is something. Man, that is great. That's like eating right and losing weight. Those are things I should be doing as we're sitting in the drive-thru at McDonald's, right? I mean, it's like, because you don't actually change behavior. You look and say, yeah, there's one more thing I probably should be doing. But at the end of the day, we don't really do anything about it. We'll agree it's a great idea. We'll have learned some, wow, that's really interesting. But we don't actually change our behavior. Why? Because most thought leadership doesn't give us a reason why we have to. And that leads us then to the next filter, which is B, frame breaking. And this is the crucial point. If we want to truly change our customers' behavior, if we want to get them to buy differently, we got to break their frame. We've got to actually, we have a longer run of content on this called mental model. It's all about what we call mental models. So you have to essentially disrupt their mental model, their understanding of how the world works. You have to show them, and so this is very different, because inherent in any world-class insight, unlike thought leadership, is contrast. The whole idea of showing your customer not just the world of what they could be doing, but show them, talk about the world talk about what they are currently doing. Inherent in any world-class insight is a juxtaposition of the benefits of alternate behavior versus the cost of current behavior. That's the key. That's world-class insight. It exists in the contrast, not just about what they could be doing, but of what they're currently doing. You have to look your customer in the eye and show them the costs of current behavior. Because inherent in any good insight story is a story of change. What are you trying to do when you challenge your customers' thinking, when you unteach them? You're trying to get them to change their thinking. Really what you're trying to do is get them to change their behavior. What do we all know about behavior change in organizations? It's hard. It's really, really hard. And so by talking about all the great things they could be doing, that's not going to get them there. You've got to talk about the cost of what they're currently doing. And that's insight. By the way, we still aren't at the center of this diagram. Something we've talked about before in the past, we'll come back to in just a minute, is to get to the center of the diagram, you actually have to lead to what we call commercial insight. The idea here is, if I go out, so let's say I do insight. I actually go out and change the way my customers think about their business. But then they take that idea, they put it in an RFP, and they put it out to bid. That feels like a really bad place to be. We call that free consulting. So you got to make sure that whatever you teach your customer about their business leads back to something you can do better than anyone else. And that's the key. It's got to lead back to your unique benefits. But if you want to make sure your insight leads back to your unique benefits, what does it mean you actually have to know? Your unique benefits. So let me park that for a minute and come back to it. But let me take that. So that's a big old diagram. Let me simplify this very easily for you. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, so I'm a very simple man. I like simple diagrams. And this is about as easy as we can make this. We call this simply the A to B statement. And it's a really nice way to frame up everything we've been talking about so far. In a world where you're not just competing against your competitor's ability to sell, but your own customer's ability to learn, you got to think about your insight, the unteaching. If you're going to unteach your customers, all of that insight's got to follow a pattern of what we call A to B. Now, the A over on the left, the A is their current state. Really, it's their current mental model, their current thinking, how they view their world working right now. The B is the desired state, how you want them to think, how you want them to behave. Now, let me ask you, when most sales reps sit down with customers, what are they talking about? Are they talking about the A or the B? They're talking about the B. When we write a white paper, what are we talking about? The A or the B? We're talking about the B. Almost all of our content, almost all of our sales efforts, they're all about the B. They're all about how the world could be better if you just embrace this solution, how the world could be better if you just adopted this technology, how the world could be better if you just bought my product. It's all about what you could be doing, but very little of our content is looking your customer in the eye and talking about what they are currently doing and how it's costing them more money than they ever realized. To very simply put it, what we find is in the world of insight, what you've got to do is not one thing, but two. You've got to break down the A before you build up the B. You got to break down the A before you build up the B. And I would ask you to take that diagram, take it back to your organization, hold it up right next to whatever piece of content you're using right now and ask yourself, how well does it do both? We do this for our members all the time. Member companies will send in their PowerPoint decks, their presentations, their collateral, and ask us, hey, give us some feedback. They'll use this as a sounding board to kind of sort of pressure test their insight. And I will tell them the same thing I would tell you. I said, before we go any further, I got this deck in front of me. I want you to tell me, open it to the page, show me the slide, show me the bullet, show me the data point, whatever it is. Show me the moment, show me that moment where you look your customer in the eye and tell them they're wrong. Because usually it's not there. By the way, do that diplomatically, professionally, empathetically. We talk about that in our other presentations. That's still hugely important. I don't know if I'd actually look your customer in the eye and say, hey, you're wrong, but pretty close. And the way you challenge in Tokyo is different than the way you challenge in Texas. We all know that too, right? But you still challenge. Where's the moment where you look your customer in the eye and say, despite all of your learning, despite all of your research, despite all of your work, there's something else about your situation that you fail to fully appreciate. Where do you break down the A? Because in this world where you're competing not just against your competitors' ability to sell, but your own customers' ability to learn, you can't just teach them, you have to unteach them. And that's a journey. That takes time. This stuff is hard. It's funny, we're a research company. If we had actually been a sales methodology company, we probably would have invented a sales methodology that was actually a little easier to do, right? But rather what we did is we did a whole bunch of research. And the research keeps telling us 5 years worth of work, no matter how we study this stuff, keeps coming back to the same set of conclusions over and over and over again. But we've come to respect that this stuff's not easy. In fact, there's really not one thing on this page, but two things that we see that we have to get right. It's not just a question of individual skill, it is a question of organizational capability. Now, on the individual skill side, that's a story that many of you know. It's the story of the challenger rep. So just as a quick recap, we went out and we studied thousands of sales reps. We've actually about 20,000 sales reps now in our data sample. What's neat is since we've acquired a company called SHL, which by the way stands for SHL, they've got a data set of 4 million professionals. And we've been able to validate Challenger off of that as well now, which is really exciting news. So, but the point is, when we went out, we studied sales professionals, we found they all fall into one of 5 distinct profiles. The hard worker, the challenger, the relationship builder, the lone wolf, the problem solver. Many of you guys know the story well, so I won't rehash it here. But if you'd like to know more about it, by all means, let us know. We've got a booth out here and we can walk you through it in detail. But we all know, so it's not just that there's these 5 profiles. It's really interesting. There's some overlap, and there's all sorts of things like that. But at the end of the day, the sales rep most likely to win in this world is the challenger rep. The sales rep least likely to win, the relationship builder. Now that's really interesting. Let me go back a slide for just a second. They're actually driving the slides in the back of the room back there. Thanks, guys. All right, so let me ask you this. If I'm a relationship builder, I'm a sales rep focused on making sure that my customers' needs are taken care of. Whatever you need, I am here for you. You say the word, I will get it done. By the way, the relationship builder is the perfect sales rep for that customer-centric world, and are going to get you in a lot of trouble when all of a sudden you sell into the world with the blue arrow. But what can the relationship builder do any of this? You know what? They're great at the B. They'll do the B all day long. They'll tell their customer how great life could be. They'll give their customer a vision of how they could change. They'll paint the picture of what's coming over the horizon. They'll talk about the castle on the hill. But you know what they won't do is what your challengers do every single day, whether you train them to or not. They won't break down the A. Because that's the difference between a challenger and a relationship builder. And this simple diagram helps us truly understand that. That's the difference. That's insight. Will you break down the A? Will you look at your customer and challenge your thinking? Will you look at your customer and challenge their learning? Now, to do that, you don't just need challenger reps. That's the individual skill side. But you also need a challenger organization. This is different. This is hard. Because what we found is this thing starts to creep back into sales enablement, into marketing collateral, into marketing, into content marketing, into product development is where we're talking now. It's a really interesting place. We talk to more CEOs today than we talk to sales reps about what this actually looks like and feels like, because you win this battle not at the individual level alone, but at the organizational level. And to do that, you got to make sure if you're going to go out and avoid that free consulting trap, that your teaching actually meets not one, but 4 different criteria that you see here on the slide. The first one is one I mentioned already, box number 1 up in the top left, is whatever you teach your customers about their business, it must lead back to your unique strengths. It must. At some point when you go into challenger thinking, you blow them away and say, wow, I've never realized that before. I got to do something about this, but who can help me with that? You got to be able to look them in the eye and say, let me show you how we can help you with that better than anyone else. Which means you actually have to know what you do better than anyone else. You have to understand what are your unique strengths. Mind you, you don't need to know what your strengths are. That's probably pretty easy. If I asked each of you to grab a piece of paper and list out your strengths, I'm guessing most of you can do that right now. But if I asked you to take that list then and actually just cross all the ones off that are not unique and just list your unique strengths, it turns out that's actually really hard to do. And we've come to respect that over the years. I mean, you take world-class companies. I don't know if you guys are here in the room or not, so apologies. But I mean, you take a world-class company like FedEx. I think we'd all agree that's a world-class company. There's all sorts of things they do great. But put them up against the UPS and ask a different question, not what are they great at, but what are they unique at. I'm sure they have an answer, and in fact, I know they've got an answer, but it is a much harder question to answer. I think we'd all agree. But that's the question you have to answer. This, by the way, we do in our memberships now. We actually run workshops all over the world to help customers, help our member companies go through the process of figuring this out. Our solutions group does engagements on this too. It's been hugely popular because this thing we have to figure out. What are our unique strengths? Because otherwise your teaching leads back to just anything. And at the same time, we also find, next thing on the top right, is whatever you teach your customers, again, it can't just teach them, it's got to unteach them. It's got to challenge customers' assumptions. It's got to reframe their thinking. Why? Because your biggest competitor today is not your competitor and their ability to sell, but your customer and their ability to learn. So you can't just go in and talk about big data is going to change the world, and they'll say, I know, and you'll say, man, they love it. Cha-ching, I'm going to Cancun this year. No, it doesn't work that way. You got to show them why what they're currently doing is wrong. You got to get them to say, holy mackerel, I got to do something differently. I can do something different. But just because you got them to think differently doesn't mean you got them to act differently. So welcome to box number 3 down in the bottom left. Now you got to catalyze action. You got to build the business case for change. And this is where the ROI calculator goes. And by the way, we all do this, right? We all have an ROI calculator. We all calculate the total cost of ownership, the lifetime value, the LTA, the TCO, the ROI. We all got one. And they all do the same thing. They're all designed to calculate the ROI, the return on investment of buying our solution versus the competitor's solution. Because they're all designed to work in a world where our number one competitor is a competition in their ability to sell. But when you now compete against your customer and their ability to learn, it's different because the very best ROI calculators today are actually supplier agnostic. I want you all to think about this as a thought experiment, practical one if you can do it. I want you all to go back to your office, take your ROI calculator, and pull your company out of it. That's a weird thing to do. It's kind of freaky. But the world's best ROI calculators are not calculating the ROI of buying your solution versus the competitor's solution. What they're calculating is they're calculating for your customer the value of changing their behavior from this to that. What's the return on investment for your customer of changing their behavior, irrespective of what supplier they go with? Because remember, today, the thing you really got to get the customers to do is change. And what do we know about change? It's hard. So what do you got to do? You got to build a business case for change, not build a business case for buying your solution. The folks at ADP, particularly in the dealer services division, they've got a really nice phrase for this. The head of sales ops there is a woman named Teresa Russell. Teresa's a great friend of ours, very smart. And she's based here in Chicago. And what Teresa would tell you is, and what she tells her sales reps is that she'll say, what we've got to do for our customers is we've got to show them that the pain of same is greater than the pain of change. The pain of same is greater than the pain of change. Because we all know change is painful. Change is hard. Change is disruptive. Change is risky. I'm not going to do change. That's expensive. That's painful. Same's not so bad. It might stink. It might be broken. I don't like it. But yeah, it's down here. What we have to do is show our customers that the pain of same is greater than the pain of change. You got to break down the A before you build up the B. And there's a story of this, but this is where I buy my time back, because this is what you do when you build this thing and you put it all together. It allows you, I'm going to go ahead just a couple slides. I've got a list of questions here I want to sum up for you. Because if I had to take everything, there's a huge number of examples we have on this. So if you guys haven't seen the full version of this content, the earlier stuff is in the book out on the kiosk out there. But there's a huge amount of research we've done since this. The book 2 is percolating in our heads right now because there's so much we've learned about this. There's so much our solutions group does now today to help customers do this, to implement this stuff that we never even knew existed 4 short years ago, because we're thinking about it today very, very differently. Because when we first landed on Challenger, it was all about the economic downturn and sort of how you succeed when customers aren't buying. Today, customers are buying more than ever before, at least more in the last couple of years. But they're buying in a completely different way. They're buying in the blue arrow. Our single biggest competitor today is not the competition, their ability to sell. It's our own customer and their ability to learn, which lands us then in 5 really interesting questions. These are the things that should be keeping you up at night. Question number 1, do you know where your customers learn? Because it's happening. Every day, right now. I don't mean that as sort of a strategic question. I don't mean that as a thoughtful, philosophical question. That is a practical question you must have an answer to. Take that question back. Write it down. Take it back. Ask your colleagues. Ask your customers. Do you know where your customers learn? You have to have an answer to that question. Question number 2, are you present where your customers learn? Through your content machine, through your sales reps, some ways, or through third-party advocates, whatever it is, are you present where your customers learn? Because if they're out there learning without you, you wind up in the 1 of 3 problem almost guaranteed. Question number 3, are you teaching your customers or are you unteaching them? Are you designing thought leadership or are you designing insight? Are you breaking down the A before you build up the B? Does your insight lead exclusively to you? Do you know how to lead exclusively to you? And I don't mean that in a flippant way. This stuff is hard. Do you have a deep understanding of what are the benefits that truly set your company apart? And does that insight, that process of breaking down the A and building up the B, lead to that? And the only way to do all that is question number 5. Are you building Challenger reps? Or are you building the Challenger organization? because that's how you win this battle. Because when you compete against your own customer and their ability to learn, you got to have everyone working together. And that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. Hopefully that gives you a sense now, not just why Challenger, what is Challenger, but why it matters so much today, because it matters more than anything else we've ever observed in our 20 years worth of research. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and have a great morning.
Thanks, Brent. Nice job.
Thank you.